this, which is, yeah, the economy is shrinking. It's not growing. In nominal terms, people will perceive the economy to be growing, but once you put in place the right inflation rate, the economy is shrinking. Nobody in the modern era wants to admit that their national economy is shrinking due to political policy. Well, that leads you to start looking at all these other things like PPI indexes. What does that really mean?
The economy is shrinking, not growing. Did Michael Saylor say that? He sure sees things from a different perspective. What's up, crypto universe? We are back with another reaction video, and today we're diving into the mind of Bitcoin's biggest guru, the one and only Michael Saylor. As inflation rages on and our local currencies continue to lose value, one man has emerged as the leading champion of an alternative monetary system, Bitcoin. That man is Michael Saylor, the visionary CEO of MicroStrategy, who has staked his company's future on the world's first decentralized digital currency. In this eye-opening video, Saylor lays bare the flaws of our current inflationary economy and passionately argues that Bitcoin represents the only reasonable solution. In this urgent video, Saylor pulls back the curtain on the profound ideological battle over the future of money. Press play and let Michael Saylor show you that Bitcoin is not just an investment, but a movement.
You get drawn into the ideology, and then in the ideology, people start to cause you to question basics. For example, what is inflation? I would have accepted the party line inflation is CPI, and then as soon as you realize inflation is not CPI or inflation, and you can generate as many inflation metrics as you wish to generate, well, if the GDP's not right and the unemployment's not right and the inflation's not right, then what is right? And so I think that the Bitcoin opened that door for me, and it caused me to question a bunch of other things I'd taken for granted, and that leads you to, read, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and then it leads you to read everything by Murray Rothbard, a history of economic thought, and you discover Austrian economics. And then it causes you to go back and you rethink all of history. Like I go back and I reread the history of the world. If you read Durant's Story of Civilization, he wrote 15,000 pages on the world. Most people didn't read 15,000 pages of world history when they were 18 years old. But if you did, you didn't understand inflation, and you didn't understand money, and you didn't understand politics, and you hadn't lived through a war. And so you misinterpret or you shallowly interpret what's going on. When you go back and you read history again, after you've lived through an actual war or a currency meltdown, or you live in 2020, right? You see one part of the economy being destroyed, another part of the economy being lifted up by the political action of a few people. And then you watch the media and you realize there's one set of media that doesn't even recognize there's a problem. And there's another set of media that takes a totally different point of view. And then you realize that news is just a curated stream of opinions. And if you wanted one set of opinions, you could watch one set of channels. If you want another set of opinions, you watch the other set of channels.
Okay, Saylor is saying that once you start dealing with Bitcoin, it opens your eyes to economic possibility to the extent that you even question basic economic knowledge like inflation. By design, Bitcoin is inherently deflationary, with a strictly limited supply that cannot be debased by government money printing. This stands in stark contrast to the inflationary nature of most national currencies. As people interact more with Bitcoin and understand its monetary properties, it can open their eyes to alternative ways of thinking about economics and the role of money in society. Concepts like sound money, hard money, and the ability to opt out of inflationary fiat systems become increasingly compelling. Saylor would argue that this shift in perspective is necessary to truly grasp the revolutionary potential of Bitcoin. It's not just an investment asset, but a new monetary paradigm that could transform how we approach issues like inflation, monetary policy, and the relationship between individuals, governments, and the money supply. Personally, I think Saylor is right in trying to get people to question their basic assumptions about inflation and the economy by exposing them to the Bitcoin framework. It's a provocative message, but one that resonates with those seeking a viable alternative to the status quo.
Generate as many inflation metrics as you wish to generate. Then you realize, well, I can just cherry pick any inflation. And so the best possible situation is to run an economy with 12% inflation while I convince the people that it's 2% inflation, because the cost of capital really is 12%, but they think it's 2%. And the difference of the 10% I get to give to anybody else I want, right? So like every pension is indexed at CPI, so I'm raising your pensions at 2%. I'm inflating the money supply at 10 or 12%, right? And that leads you to question a lot of things. Well, if the inflation rate isn't correct, then maybe GDP isn't correct. How do you actually measure gross domestic product, if it's not inflation adjusted? And I think the CEO of Microsoft, made a point.
I don't believe this statement is entirely accurate or representative of mainstream economic thinking. The notion that inflation can be picked implies that policymakers or other actors can simply choose or manipulate the level of inflation at will. In reality, inflation is a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that is influenced by a wide range of factors: monetary policy, fiscal policy, global supply and demand dynamics, geopolitics, and more. While policymakers can certainly take actions that impact inflation to some degree, they do not have complete control over it. Inflation arises from the interactions of these various economic forces, some of which are outside the direct purview of any single institution or decision maker. Claiming that inflation can be picked oversimplifies the challenge of managing and mitigating inflationary pressures. The more accurate perspective, in my view, is that policymakers can implement monetary and fiscal policies aimed at influencing the trajectory of inflation, but they cannot simply pick a desired inflation rate with certainty. There are always unintended consequences and external shocks that can derail even the best-laid plans. So while I understand the sentiment behind the "inflation can be picked" statement, I would caution against taking it too literally. Inflation remains a complex, multifaceted challenge that requires nuanced, evidence-based policymaking, not the notion that it can be easily picked or controlled.
Yeah, the economy is shrinking, it's not growing. In nominal terms, people will perceive the economy to be growing, but once you put in place the right inflation rate, the economy is shrinking. Nobody in the modern era wants to admit that their national economy is shrinking due to political policy. Well, that leads you to start looking at all these other things like PPI indexes. What does that really mean? And then what about unemployment? How can you have an unemployment rate of 2 or 3% when 45% of the people don't have a job? Like what's the definition of unemployment? Well, we only count people as unemployed if they wish they weren't. Huh? Huh? So all of these metrics that talking heads on TV, they argue about, they're all synthetic faux metrics, and you can build an entire world and a trading strategy and an ideology around synthetic, cherry-picked false metrics. Or once you discover Bitcoin, you start thinking, well, if the GDP's not right and the unemployment's not right.
Saylor made the statement, "The economy is shrinking and not growing." He's basically suggesting that traditional economic metrics like GDP growth are failing to accurately capture the true state of the economy. There's an argument that these measures don't fully account for factors like inflation, asset bubbles, and debt levels. From my perspective as an informed observer, I would caution against making definitive claims that the economy is shrinking without a very clear and well-supported argument. Economic conditions are complex, and reasonable people can look at the same data and come to different conclusions. All right, we've heard a lot from the famous Bitcoin genius Michael Saylor. Say all you want, but the man is a genius, and he does have results when it comes to economic talk and all. But this doesn't stop you from doing your own research and finding your bearing and ideology. And once you have, let's talk. Hit me up in the comments with your thoughts on Saylor's perception, your own Bitcoin thesis, or anything else crypto-related. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future crypto deep dives.